I'm on the shores of Lake Boga, just near Swan Hill in Victoria. Behind us is a highway that runs from sort of Melbourne right through to Adelaide. I want to tell you a story of failure. I like to tell stories of success, but now and then it's good to pause and see, okay, not everything works out the way you want. The story begins over in Germany, actually, during the early 1800s or even earlier, with a group called the Moravians. They were a sort of a pietistic group of Protestant Christians who had a real heart, a burn for mission. A very small group, amazing proportion, went all over the world, to the Americas, across the Pacific, and to Australia. And early on they developed a vision for what they called then New Holland, and particularly for the Aboriginal people. It seemed like things had come together about 1840 or so, when the La Trobe brothers, who were the early British Moravians, they had a society there, began to dream about what they could do for the natives of New Holland. Peter La Trobe was sort of ahead of the chapter in England, and his brother Charles came to Australia, and of course his name became famous here in Victoria. You hear of La Trobe University and so on. Well, he was the governor here of, wasn't quite Victoria then, they were called Port Phillip, and it was just changing mid-century towards Victoria, the colony. There were two young men, Spiseki and Tager, who had a burn for mission, and they came all the way from England, all the way out here, and they met Governor La Trobe, and he was a keen supporter of what they were doing, and at that time he was allotting land to specifically for the Aboriginal people, and he wanted to establish a mission. So he chose this spot, Lake Boga, and here on the southeastern edge of the lake somewhere, we're not sure exactly where, they set up a little mission station in the early 1850s. Now, the big problem for them was, first of all, there was great support for them in Melbourne, and big meetings, people backed them, the Anglican bishop got behind them, the local settlers even seemed to be supporting them early on, but very quickly tensions arose because the road going through here, they built their station across what was basically the highway, and so traffic was coming through and drovers were coming through with sheep and cattle, and on top of that the gold rushes started. So sadly there are lots of arguments, and it's not time to go into them now, but over the next 5 years the tensions grew between the settlers and the missionaries, and I think sadly the Aboriginal people were sort of caught between the two, and they found it hard to keep Aboriginal people here. That was the goal, to set it up and show them how to farm, which was probably a high aim. It happened in a few places, but generally speaking the Aboriginal people had a totally different mindset about farming and how they existed. So there were tensions between the dreams and visions of the missionaries, the insistence of the settlers, the travellers coming through, and the abuse of the Aboriginal people, both by settlers and travellers, and that upset the missionaries a great deal. So sadly, in the space of about 5 years, particularly the leader of the mission said, oh, okay, it's too hard, pulled the pin, without permission really from his superiors in England or Germany, and shut the show down. And when you read about it, it's considered a failure. Well, how do you sum that up? I think about it this way. I think here's half a world away in Germany, people with a heart to help the Aboriginal people. Beautiful. I mean, that's not a bad thing. Were they colonialists? Not really. They weren't sort of wanting to just set up a colony, but they were wanting to help partly defend, partly educate, and instill the good news of Jesus in the hearts of the Aboriginal people. That was why they came. Their German background probably made it a bit more difficult, but at the end of the day you've got to give credit to those young men making that effort, not coming to make money, not coming to set up land, not make a name for themselves, but they just wanted to come to serve. And even though we could say, well, it's a failure, one of them went on to work with another missionary in Victoria, and they had a more successful time there. So when I look at this beautiful setting, you know, nice lake, it was a good location, but it's a lesson about not everything works out the way you want. You can have a vision from God to do something good, but sometimes it gets undermined. Should they have hung in longer? Well, good question. Some of their friends said they should have, and they gave up too easily. But then if you're half a world away, it's hard to understand the pressures that are actually on you here. So summing it up, is it the story of a failure? Well, yeah, in one sense it is. But in the overall scheme of things, will it have a skerrick of value? I think so. I think good things happen in the men themselves. Some things happen amongst the Aboriginal people, perhaps even some of the local settlers. And in the bigger picture in Australia, the Moravians did do some extraordinary work. So I thought it would be good to bring that chapter to attention, because not everything is a success, not everything's textbook, not everything works out smoothly, but men and women with faith step out, trust God, make a start, and I'm not sure exactly how he measures it, but I don't think necessarily he'd call it a failure.